Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Bava Batra, Daf Kuf Gimel. We are going to begin on Kuf Beis Amud Beis by the Mishnah, by the new Perek. Oimer lechavero, Beis Kor Offer Ani Moicher Lecha. So a person says that I'm selling you a Beis Kor Offer. That language. Now, a Beis Kor, says the Rashbam, this is equivalent to the two saw measurement of the chatzar of the Mishkan, which is 100 by 50, and therefore that's broken down to 75,000 square amos. That's what it said. We see here. So say b'choshev lebeis kor tesva pa'amim, 15 times mea al nun. Shebeis kor hu chaymer. So you have again 100, 10 by 100 by 50, which is 150, and then 15. So it ends up becoming 75,000 square. Fine. So that's what's the din. So it depends on exactly what this earth looks like. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Hayusham nikoyim amukim asar tefachim. Let's say there's cracks that are very deep crevices in the ground, making it very difficult for you to plant. And they're more than 10 tefachim down, or slaim gavoin tefachim. Or you have these big rocks that are higher than 10 tefachim, which again kind of interferes with the normal way of a person wanting to plant on this base core. So einan nimdadin ima. So the Mishnah says that they're not included, and therefore, even if they're there, that's not considered part of the cheshbon of the dimensions of a base core, and therefore, because of that, you need to add on to this space more land to be able to get to the proper amount. Now, pachis mikan, if let's say the rocks are not so big, they're less than 10 tefachim, or the cracks are less than 10 tefachim, nimdon anima. So therefore, it is included. Now, says the Rashbam, again, that's specifically in this case. Actually, let's continue with the Mishnah. V'im oimerlo kibeis kor afar. So instead of you saying base kor afar, you said kibeis kor afar. So like it. So if you sham nikoyim amukim yosim asar tefachim, slaim gavoyin yosim asar tefachim, harayil nimdan anima. So the fact that you change the language, so therefore we're not being as specific, and therefore it's, as the Rashbam says, mashma kamoy shehu. It's almost saying as is. So therefore I'm selling you this amount of square footage as is. There may be big rocks and big ditches in there, but this is how I'm selling it. So therefore it doesn't make any difference what the dimensions are. As far as how big the rocks are, the din still is, it's included. You don't have to add on to any extra land. Now the Rashbam says, when the Mishnah says base kor offer, focus on the word offer, koloimer haroy lazriya. The fact that you said the word offer, that means it's something which is fit for planting. It's something which is arable. Avol im lo ha'oimer offer. Let's say you didn't say the word offer. Now if you kula sloyim, even if it's all rocks, hikiu, it's still a good sale. The shem libnois bias. Maybe you want to build a house on top of it. Ola mishtach baperi. You just need a place to have your fruits dry. Zavan leviyan lekech al yoina. Therefore, the buyer al tachtaina rather. The buyer has the lower hand. So this is an important point. It's because he dafka said the word afar is why this din applies. But if he didn't say the word afar, which therefore maybe could have had some other purpose, or some other utility of this land, even though if it wasn't necessarily for planting. So again, and there's tons of rocks there, it would still be a good sale. Question 11. Ma nafkemi ben ha'omer chavero base kor afar ani marchacha and omer base kor karka ani marchacha. So he said, afar hainu royal is it's for planting. Afikach en makabel, you didn't accept upon yourself nikoyim amukim yud kiyotzaboy. Level karka afil kula slime higiu. It's a very important Rashbam. Okay, fine. That's that, and as one could imagine, on cue, TB 27 is the same question as 11, which I'll just see what I wrote for TB 27. This is what I wrote. Offer ze mashma davka l'zreya v'lo yisrayis Aval im loy oimer afar oz hamachira chal afil im yesh nimukais gavoa sara. Okay, nimukim. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. So that's the din. There's a distinction between rocks being more than 10 tefachim or less than 10 tefachim when it comes to machira. Now, Tanan Hostan, the Gemara says we learn over there, we learn elsewhere in Masechtas Erchin that hamakdish sedehu, if a person is makdish their field, b'shas hayovel, and during the time of the yovel, namely when yovel is noyig, says Rashbam, b'zman shayovel noyig, the ilu b'zman shein hayovel noyig, if the Beis Hamikdash wasn't around, there was no yovel, which is like nowadays, Tanan be'erchin denifta b'shav. Now, normally when it comes to a steachuza, again, this is only b'zman shebase time of yovel's noyig. Time of yovel's noyig, even though normal lands, we evaluate how much the land is when you're makdish it, and if you want to redeem it, then that's what you do. However, if you're makdish a steachuza, so then the din is, says the Mishnah, noisin l'il beis zera chaymer sarayim 50 shekel kesef. So you should give for each base core that you are makdish to redeem it 50 shekel kesef. Now, of course, this is based on the yovel year. So, and if let's say you did this right away and you have 50 years, then that's how much you pay, 50 shekel kesef, like almost 1 shekel kesef per year. But let's say you did this 10 years in, there's 40 years until yovel, then it would be 40. That's the idea behind that. As the pasuk says, Rashbam quotes, "The imestechuzaso yakdish ishal Hashem v'ayerkacha to redeem it lafi zaru zer chaymer sarayim b'hainu base core." So when it comes to a base core, which is what we're talking about in this parak, name of the parak, base core. So the din is that if you want to redeem it, davka ma'astechuz, an ancestral plot of land goes all the way back to the time of Yoshua ben Nun. So then the din is that you get, it's 50 kesef. However, this is why we're bringing it down. What if there's big rocks there which are bigger than 10, etc., or big ditches which are deeper than 10? Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, ein nimdadin ima. They're not considered to be part of the cheshbon, and therefore you have to end up again giving more, similar to what our Mishnah said, right? You have to end up giving more flat land. Pachas mekan nimdadin ima. So it basically sounds quite like the same din of our Mishnah. V'mai. The question is, why do we say that that's the din? Why don't we just say that you were? Why do we say that that it's not part of the cheshbon? Why don't we say that you were makdish it separately? You're makdish this and you're makdish that. Says the Rashbam. Just say you can redeem each one separately. Kamakdish te sadas, just like you're makdish 2 fields. You can be makdish one. Or redeem the other one and not the other one. So why do we have to say, oh, you have to tack on land? Why would you say that? Why don't you just say you're makdish both of them, and you could you can do an erech in the value of either of them? Well, maybe you can't be makdish your steachuza unless it's a certain amount, and therefore you have to have a base core. So therefore these crevices, these rocks, you can't be makdish it because it's less than base core. It's not true. So when you redeem it, you would think that's the amount only when it comes to a base core. So the truth is, this measurement again is not based on the real value of the land. This is an exception that you pay 50 shekel kesef. Yeah, the pasuk says for a base core, but the reality is you could be makdish and then part of a steichuz which is smaller than that, and you could redeem it. So therefore, and you would still pay, I guess, the same 50 shekel kesef. But the question is, so you just do both separately? So I don't understand why you can just do that. So because we're talking about these crevices which are filled with water. They're not arable. And how do I know that they're not fit for planting? Because they're just like rocks. So just like a rock you can't plant, so to this you can't plant. Okay? Says Rashbam, v'lo krina be base zera. It's not considered to be a base zera. Hilchach in nimdon anymore. El b'fnei atzim liftois b'shavehen. You would redeem those rocks and those crevices, but it would be based on its value. It wouldn't fall in the same category of a steachuza, that those rocks. Again, because the only time we say this is only if it's a zera chaymer sarayim. It has to be some form of, like for planting, that you have it's shack to plant there. But even in these crevices, you can't just go down and plant there because it's filled with water. So therefore, because of that, if you wish to redeem it, you would have to do it just based on its actual real value and not based on the prescribed mentioning of chamishim shekel kesef. So where it says, okay, so ihachi afil pachas bekanami. Understand, why do we make a distinction when it comes to this between if these crevices are above or below 10, even if they're less than 10, if they're filled with water, so you can't use it. No hanhu nigani da'ara mikri, shidri da'ara imikri. So the reality is, says Rashbam, these are considered like cracks in the ground. Peculiar karkav, ein lehem shem bifnei atzmo. It doesn't have a name by itself. Kivan de ikra hasad royal Israel. Since the majority of the field is for planting, harikol hasad nikra beis zera. It's also called a beis zera. The fact that it's so small, it doesn't have the chashivas bifnei atzmo. It's so small, and therefore, if it's not so deep, I should say. So therefore, even though again it's filled with water, you can't use it anyway. But we don't say it has a chashivus b'fnei atzma that you'd have to redeem it. Rather, it's considered to be all part of the whole thing. But that's only if it's less than 10. If it's 10, then in fact you would have to redeem it based on its value, and then you would have to tack on the other amount of land, which is actually arable. Okay, so that is the din when it comes. Fine. So hachamai. So here, what's the din? Hacha mai. So says Rashbam, Nikoyim amukim yod mastisin gabe machira katani nami ein nindonim ima. So when we said in our Mishnah that when it comes to a sale, that it's not included if it's above 10 tfachim. So mi mayri nami bin nikoyim malei mayim. Is our Mishnah also talking about it's filled with water? Domidus salayim. In other words, how do we know this case of being of hektish, of the steachuza, that we establish has to be a case where it's filled with water? Is that true also by our Mishnah, that it's only in the case where it's filled with water? So Mary says, no, even if it's not filled with water, it doesn't make any difference. When it comes to a mechira, it still will not count. Why? Can't you go down and plant there anyway? So my time, because Adam writes a litin moisa, person not going to pay, but makam echad v'yodakol loy kishtayim v'shlishim kaimais. Person's not going to purchase a field, and basically he has the tircha of having to plant up here, then go down, then go back up. So therefore, even if it's not filled with water, even though you could plant in these crevices, the din is that even though because there's no water in it, still we would say it's not included in the base core. Maska Ravina. Avahadomi the Soim Katan. You understand? We just compared it to rocks. Masoim the Labane Zreninhu. Avhananami Labane Zreninhu. It must be we're talking about it's filled with water because we just proved that we're comparing it to rocks. And when you compare it to a rock, you can't plant on a rock, so you can't plant there either. Now Kikatani Dumina Soim Apachas Mekan. We're not comparing it to a rock that you can't plant on it, but we're talking about it's a rock when it comes to when it is small. Says Rashbam, Kalemer Mishum Seif the Katani Pachas Mekan Nibdam Nima. That if it's small, then it is included. So Tadaration Nikayim Usloim, the Labade Zreninhu. Lashmiina to tell you the Heichadavi Pachais. Even small Afgab the Labade Zreninhu. The Chiddush is if they're small, even by rocks, that you can't plant them at all, we still will include it. So that's a Chiddush. The fact that we mentioned rocks, that even though you can't plant there at all, nonetheless, it will still be counted as the base core if it's less than 10. But when we talk about the nemokim, the ditches, there's no water in it, and therefore the chiddush over there is even though it is 10, since it's 10, even though there's no water, it's not considered to be part of the cheshbon because the person doesn't want to have to plant there. That's the idea behind that. Okay. All right. Good. Let's continue. Let's say I think we got that. Let's look at question 12. When in imdanim nikaim shebasadach steachuz lifdaisam imasadal fi cheshbon a kotzuf baparsha. So when do we, at what situation do we not include the nikayim in a field of a steachuza to redeem it together with the field? So first of all, if it's gavoyim yud, or and it's mulayim mayim and it's filled with water. B'sarch ian ibeinan rachvin arba. Does it have to have the width of 4? Like the Rashbam says regarding Mechira. Okay, that it doesn't. That's not so clear. Okay, question TA 27. Eze chiluk l'dina iko. What's the difference? Bein the koyim the mikdash the makdash steachuza when the koyim the base core offer any moichalcha umatam hachiluk. Great question. So when it comes to be makdash, it's only if it's filled with water. Does ul mikri b'nei zriya. When moich base core, if you ain malay mayim, if it's not filled with water, it's still not included because a person would not want to purchase something and to plant in shtein shalosh min kaimais. TA 27. That's a great question. Okay, so again, that's the distinction. Afal pi she'ein malay mayim, my time ein adam roitza sheyitin ma'isa b'makam echad v'roi v'yiru shnayim shaloshim kaimais. However, over here, it's only if it's malay mayim. Okay, let us. Actually, we also have question 28. Be'eza oifen einim danim nikayim shebistei achuz lifdaisam imasadal fi cheshben hakotzut b'parsha in gavoa eser or asar tfachim v'heim malay mayim. Okay, which is basically what we just said with question 12. Okay. That was question TB 28. All right. 2 dots. Let's continue. So, Pachas Mekan Nimdon. So, Rabbi Yitzchak. Turashim, if you have small rocks, Turashim She'amru Beis Arbas Kabin. So, when we combine all the rocks together, it must be no more than 4 kabin. Otherwise, that's considered to be too many rocks. Okay, so that's the next idea behind this. So says the Rashbam, but masnisin pachis mikan. When he said if it's smaller than 10, that it's nimdananimo is considered to be part. That's only hanimila de nimnad could go into loy havi ella base arbas kabin, bein kulan, because you don't have so many rocks. If you have so many rocks, even if they're small, then that's not going to be part of the deal. If there's so many rocks that it would be equivalent to the amount of base arbas kabin, so then that would also not be good. Amar vokva barchama v'hu shemuvloyin b'chameshes kabin. It's only in the situation where it's spread out among five kav. Says the Rashbam, these 4 kav have to be spread out. B'chameshes kabin. Shemufuzarin b'chol chameshes kabin. They're spread out. For koshkin im mufuzarin yoser. Certainly, if they're spread out more, going b'shisho b'zayin kabin the batli. If let's say it's spread out even more, then it's batal. Im in mufuzarim el badal kabin umeksa etc. Then it would differ. And Rav Chia Baralba Imer Rav Yochanan Behu Shemuvloim Baruba Shel Sada. It must be spread out to the majority of the field. Says the Rashbam. Okay, fine. Now, Boy Mine. So we have a bunch of tekus over here. Boy Rav Chia Baralba Ruban B'Miyutin Baruba Mahu Teku. So if the 4 kav were scattered throughout the majority of the field, but in such a way that most of the rocks are in a minority of this section, and the rest are in the majority of this section, so then what's the din tegu? Okay. So, and we're going to have a bunch of these types of questions. Exactly how are they spread out is basically the questions that are brought over here. So, Rabbi Yirmiyah, as we continue to Kuf Gimel and Beis, we have a few pictures popping up. Kishir Mahu. What if it's like a bracelet, like a circle, like which you see in the first picture? Kishur Mahu. What if the rocks are all in some type of a straight row? Or this box, they're all straight. It's tadinin mahu, which the Rashbam says is karni shor, like the horns of a bull. And you have this picture as well. V'chein kulan achar nacharein mulomizdara shaper karishan. Each one you can't plant is better than the one before. That's why these are all different questions. Derech al kasoin mahu teku. So if it's the rocks were like this diagonal, or almost like a diagonal W, what's the din there? Okay, so all these questions, it's unresolved exactly how these rocks are formed, whether or not that changes the din of this base core. So Tana, if you have one individual rock, a field kosher, even though it's a small amount, in nimnimo, it's not included. Says the Rashbam. This is referring to the part of the Mishnah that said if the rocks are smaller, that they're included. So says the Rashbam, if it's one rock, chutzmin asada, samach asada, it's outside of the field, but it's near the field. You also start measuring from there. The field ihavi hahu sela kosher, even it's small. The havi nomoch miyud tfachim. Harbe v'katzir mi arba tefachim. It's less than 4 tefachim. A field hachi in dimdani much should not be included. Dolbati gavisada, because it's not really part of the field. It's on the side of the field. It's not in the field. V'im hoya samach l'meitzar. If it's near the border, a field koshu in dimdani. Again, then it's not included. Boira papa musak offer minatay mahu. What if the earth separates it from the boundaries? There's some separation between it and the boundary. Is that considered any different teku? Boy, Rav Ashi offers milmata. If the earth is on the bottom of sunma milmal and the rock is above, or offer milmal of a sun milmata mahu teku. So these are all questions that are unresolved regarding the exact formations of these rocks that are found in these people's land. Okay, no questions there. Adkan.